My name is Elliot Rosenberg. I was born in March of 1924. My dad owned a little grocery store, a corner grocery, very small, but that's how people bought food in those days. And he was reasonably successful. He was served in World War I for a short time, and when he got out, he opened a grocery store, operated with his father. Anyhow, we had a very nice life. We always had a car and a comfortable home, ate well until 1930 when the Depression hit. And I don't think he earned a living for 10 years, really, after that. Still had the store, but he was, fortunately, he was very thrifty, and I'm still that way. I learned that during the Depression. And he saved money, so we were always comfortable as far as my personal living was concerned. And this is all in Kansas City, Missouri, where I was born. Things were tough, and people were moving out all the time or being forced out. Probably most of the houses were sold originally, and they probably were foreclosed by banks. So he had all these customers, and a lot of them had been his customers for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And every week they came in, they had jobs, and they paid with their weekly paycheck. He got paid. Well, then beginning when the Depression hit, they lost their jobs. And they didn't have those kind of reserves to pay. And so what do you do with a customer that you've served that lives in your neighborhood? You know, they're almost like friends. What do you do? Well, they're looking for work. They're honest people, but they don't have the money. They can't pay. And the first thing you know, he had a lot of money on the books, on the little. Every time they'd come in, we'd write it down on. I used to work in the store in the Depression years, and you'd write it down on a slip of paper that he'd tear out, and he'd put it on a peg. I mean, that's the way it was done. And, well, he didn't get paid. And how long do you carry someone? Well, you carried them a pretty long time because they were friends. And they'd always, they were honest, but if they don't have the money, they can't pay. Yeah. And he ended up, well, first of all, the people then would be forced out of their houses. They were renting, so they had to move. And he never had credit statements on anybody or like you do when you're going to a bank or something. They get a background on you, a lot of things. He had no way of finding them once they moved. And he never got any money from them. And he wrote off all that. That's why he didn't make I'm sure he didn't make a living. I know he didn't for all those years. I had finished 1 year of junior college when I got my draft notice. And so I knew I was going to be called up. I was reasonably healthy and so forth. So when I got my draft notice, I decided I'll enlist because then I can do what I want to do. And I decided I'm going to enlist as a pilot in the Air Corps. At the time, they said they've got so many in the program that it would take probably till the next summer before you'd be called. And that's good because I'll finish another year of college. So I started college that year, but came about December of that year, I got a notice to report for active, you go into basic training first. And I got a report to go to basic training. I remember we were put into a tent. It was built on a floor, and we did have a little furnace or a little heater, coal heater inside. And so we were there, and I was there about, 8 or 10 days, and there were 8 of us living in this tent. And one of the people in the tent got spinal meningitis. And so we were quarantined. So we couldn't take part in any of the normal, regular activities. And so we were put in a separate group, and we went to separate masses, and we couldn't mix with anybody. And that's how I went through basic training. And at that time, the Air Force, or Air Corps, decided that there were so many people going into pilots training that weren't qualified, so they needed more education and so forth to go through all the programs that were necessary. And then we took a test. And since I already had a year of college and I had good grades and so forth, I passed the test, so I didn't have to finish that course of training. Then they sent me out to the West Coast, Santa Ana, California, to pre-flight training. And then they gave us a flight physical. We didn't know all this, but at the time all we got was a physical to get into the service. Okay, they gave a flight physical. And within, as soon as we took the flight physicals, about 50% of the people that went out there to get their flight physical failed the flight physical. Most of them not for, but for eyesight and for coordination and things like that. There were some very things, I don't know how I passed. I remember they gave us a probe, and it was on a turntable, and there was a little spot about that big, and you were supposed to be able to hold that probe on it while it went around and things like that. It was pretty, and most people failed because of color blindness and depth perception and things, but half of the guys that they accepted, well, they were already in the service, so what did they do? They sent them to other places where they needed them. And fortunately, I passed that. We were there 2 months. We got 60 hours of flight training. And now the airplane we flew had no electrical system or anything like that. Someone had to crank it up on the side, an inertial starter or something, and no electrical system. He had very basic instruments. The gas tank was in front, and the gas gauge was a cork on a wire that went up through the filler valve, and in front of you, you could see this.
Tell how much gas you had left.
Tell how much gas you had left. Well, then we went to basic, which was a much more sophisticated airplane, and then I went to twin engine, and we did about 60, 70 hours in each of those things, and then I graduated. I was a pilot. I got my certificate and promoted to a second lieutenant. I became an officer. And then they sent me to transition school in the B-24. And that's where we were assigned a crew. And we became a crew. I don't know how many hours we had there, probably 50, 60, 70, 80 hours. We had quite a long time. It was only 2.5 months or so. And then they sent us I picked up with my crew. We picked up a new airplane in Topeka, Kansas, and at an Air Force base there, and we flew a new airplane overseas to Italy. I went over I think in June of '44. And I was the co-pilot on the crew. We had a more experienced pilot as our aircraft commander, and I was the co-pilot. And we were there for a short time, and not very long, and they assigned us a mission. The day before they do that, assigned us a mission, and I couldn't go. I was the co-pilot, and they used the first couple missions, they would send an experienced pilot as the co-pilot of that aircraft in order to help train the crew. And my crew was shot down on their first mission. Fortunately, they became prisoners of war. I think my first mission, I flew a mission to Ploesti oil fields, which was one of the major targets we had, and it was a fairly long mission. That was a big oil center, and we were dropping bombs on the oil facilities there. Anyhow, I don't know. I was always concerned on every mission, and we always had to fly through, almost always flew through a lot of flak and everything, and we used to lose aircraft. I'd be flying off of a wing, or someone in our would get hit, or something would happen to the airplane, and they'd have to drop out of the formation, and you hope they'd get home. And I remember we were on one mission that we lost an engine just after we got to the target, and we couldn't keep up with the formation with the rest of our group, and we were finally all alone. This was in not Germany, but one of the other countries, and we ended up being flying alone, and then we saw another aircraft, another B-24 that was flying alone, and we joined with them, and we flew two of us together. You're usually 20, 21, 22,000 feet up. And so you don't see on the ground, but there are people making photographs. That's part of to see the effectiveness. In fact, they grade you and everything on that. And you heard of the Norden bomb sight, which they say they could put a bomb in a barrel from 25,000 feet. Well, maybe you could, but we were not that good, but there's so many things in 20,000 feet, different air currents, and the altitude of the airplane when the bomb actually drops. The bombardier on the lead plane, through his bomb sight, he's controlling the lead aircraft. The pilot's not doing anything, just watching everything, or have to take over in case something goes wrong. But he's not even flying the plane. The bomb sight is flying the airplane through the system. And, just slightest differences and the aircraft is constantly changing. And everyone else in that, let's see, there's 3, 6, 7 people flying off of that lead aircraft. And so many things can go. In every airplane, the pilot is a pilot of flying in a tight formation. I mean, you're constantly checking and changing your speed slightly and everything. It's really very difficult and very exhausting to fly in formation. That's why you need two pilots almost. You couldn't fly 8 hours, sometimes 9 hours, in a formation. I mean, you just couldn't stand it. In Italy, for heavy-duty bombers, they call them heavy-duty bombers, the big bombers, we had to fly 35 missions for a tour of duty. And when you flew 35 missions, you were sent home for rest and recuperation. Okay, and I was on my way home. I'd flown my 35 missions, and I was on a boat home when the war in Europe ended. So I flew my 35 missions, and I ended up, as I say, coming home. And when I went for reassignment after a 30-day rest and recuperation at home, went out to the West Coast again, and they said, well, we're going to have to and you have enough points and so forth, we can release you from active duty. They didn't discharge me, but they released me from active duty, and I was home when the war in Japan ended.